queues for fuel. Medical professionals on strike. Growing shortage of life-saving pharmaceuticals. Rural communities in despair. Constituent parties of the government seek to resolve country's crises.
Hello there, you're watching Primetime News on TV1. For the News First team, I'm Milky Pasha. Before we head into your stories in detail, let's start off with a look at tonight's headlines.
Seven-and-a-half-hour power cut tomorrow. People continue their wait in queues. People take to the streets demanding fuel. Dollar payments made for the diesel consignment. Crisis to end by Friday, ministers tell president. Banks threaten to issue dollars for fuel imports. Trade unions raise accusations. Moves to restrict imports of 600 products. 11th constituent government parties hold talks. Request to conduct all-party convention.
Starting off with your top story tonight, tensions arose as people continued to remain in queues to purchase fuel today as well.
Those who couldn't purchase fuel at a filling station in Wadigala in Hambantota for many days staged a protest by blocking the Matharavalla road this morning. A team of officers, including the officer in charge of the Hungama police station, arrived at the location. Our correspondent reported that the people were, however, unable to purchase diesel today. Those who attempted to purchase fuel at the Pilikada fuel station in Mawatagama held a protest by obstructing the Kurunagala Kandy main road. Our correspondent reported that the fuel station had received fresh stocks of diesel an hour later. The transport, agriculture, fisheries, tourism and industrial sector has been severely affected by the shortage of diesel. People queued up at an IOC fuel station along the Kandy Road in Kalaniya since last night to purchase fuel.
අපි ඉරේලා ඒට මේ දැන් ගාවේ විනාඩි 10කට ඉස්සෙල්ලා අර පොලිමේ කොටලන් ඉන්න පොලිම ඒ කියන්නේ මහයම් කරපුවා තමයි දැන් මේ ගෙවන්න කට්ටිය.
This was the situation at a fuel station along Armour Street in Colombo last night.
හොඳයි ඉතින් සෞභාග්‍ය දැක්ම හොඳයි.
While people in Colombo spent their night in queues, the situation was no different to the people in rural areas. Queues were seen at the fuel station at the Minere junction from last night.
අපි ඊයේ 3 ඉඳලා තමයි මේ ඩීසල් ටිකක් වාහනයකට ගහලා බලන් ඉන්න අපි අදිනේ වැලි ලොරි 3කට ගහනකොට ඩීසල් මෙතන ඉවරයි කිව්වා මොකද ඩග්ලි මහත්තයා මේ ලොරි මේ නිපුණ ලොරි ටික ඇවිල්ලා මෙතන වාහන ටික ගහගෙන ගියා ඩීසල් ටික දැන් අවුරුදු 53ක් වෙනවා 53ටම මේ ඩීසල් පොලිම එක ඉන්නවාම තෙල් එනවා දැන් එනවා මේ එනවා කියනවා තෙලුත් නැහැ මොකුත් නැහැ මෙච්චර කාලයක් මේ වුණාද අපිට මේකද සෞභාග්‍යය උඹලා මේක බැයි නම් ඵලයක් යකෝ අපිට සපයි හොඳටම සපයි.
Fuel stations in Dambulla had run out of diesel last night. A tense situation arose at a fuel station in the area as diesel wasn't sold to those without vehicles. This was the situation at the fuel station along Urugodawatta today. Many vans and buses had been parked at the fuel station after they had run out of fuel. Our cameras captured how heavy vehicles like buses and lorries had been parked along one vehicle lane. Heavy traffic was reported near the New Kalani Bridge in Paliguda this morning.
මේම උන්නේ අපි විදිච්ච කාලේ නම් මේ වගේ රටට මේ වගේ
පරායට යන්න විදියක් නැහැ. ඩීසල් නැහැ. ඩීසල් කාලා තියෙන දැන් පිටිපස්සේ තියෙන වාහනේ තල්ලු කරගෙන ආවේ. මෙයාට ඒව පේන්නේ නැහැ. එයාලා යන්නේ ලෑන්ඩ් රෝවර් එකේ ඩිස්කවරි එයාලා වාහනේ බයින්නේ නැහනේ. දුප්පත් මනුස්සයට තමයි මේ හැමදේම. සෞභාග්‍ය දැක්ම අතිවිශිෂ්ටයි.
අල්ලබතලා වඤ්ඤොක්කා බට්ටිය කාව මිනිසුන්ට රයිස් කාපු වෙනදා මේ වෙලාව වෙලා තියෙන්නේ. ආණ්ඩුවලට බැලලා ගන්න මිනිසුම බැන ගන්න ඕන.
This was a situation at a fuel station along Union Place in Colombo. A long queue for diesel was also seen near the Nilumpokana Theatre. A long queue for diesel was seen at a fuel station in Colombo too since this morning.
බලේ ගන්නකොට කොහොමද කිව්වේ අර සැපද මේ සැපද කියලා දැන් එක සැපක්වත් නැහැ. සැප කටේ. හරිද? එක දවස් පැය දෙකක් ලයිට් කපුවම රාජපක්ෂ මහත්තයාගේ සැපදට ලයිට් කපන්න දෙන්න බැරි ආණ්ඩුව මොකටද කියලා.
Many fuel stations from Kalutara to Panudura had run out of diesel.
අපි ජනාධිපතිතුමාට ඡන්දය දුන්න මේ රටට හොඳක් සිද්ධ වෙයි කියලා හිතලා. නමුත් කිසිම හොඳක් සිද්ධ වුණේ නැහනේ.
මොකද මොලකාරය වෙලා රට කරනයි කියනවා රටෙත් නැහැ. ඉතින් ඇමරිකාවෙන් ඕන් තරම් ඩොලර් හොයාගන්න බැරි මේ ඇමරිකාවේ මේ අයිතිකාරයෝ. සැපයි කියන එකේ ඉතින් උඩරිමේ සැපයි. මහ එක්කෙනා දන්නේ පොඩි අය දන්නේ පොඩි අය දන්නේ මහ එක්කෙනා දන්නේ. අපිට අපි ගහ ගන්න ඕනේ ඡන්දය දුන්නා.
This was the situation at the Kandy town.
අය 4යි විනාඩි 45ක් පොලිමේ ඉඳලා තමයි ත්‍රිරෝද රථයට පෙට්‍රල් ටික දාගත්තේ. ඇයි අපිට දැනෙන දුක මේ කාලකන්නින්ට නොදැනෙන කියන එක අපි මේ වෙලාවේ ප්‍රශ්න කරනවා.
පාන්දර එකේ ඉඳලා පොතෙඩ් එකේ පොලිමේ මේ දවස් ටිකේ ගෙදර නිදියන්න නැහැ ෂෙඩ් වල නිදියන්නේ.
Garment factory workers took to the streets in Borolesgamua opposing the power cuts as it has disrupted their work. They say power cuts and the fuel shortage have affected their livelihoods.
The garment industry is a sector that can generate dollars. The country must be protected to uplift the industry. If all industries unite to take action against this, it will cause massive damage. Innocent people are affected by this. They are walking to work. There is no point if they cannot protect us. We were deceived. We were staunch supporters of them, but we won't vote for them again.
If we can't run our factories and if we don't have an income, we won't be able to pay salaries. It will affect the entire sector. They give us free transport, but there is no diesel.
The Public Utilities Commission has announced that power cuts of 7.5 hours will be imposed tomorrow. The power cuts will be imposed from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m.
President Gotabaya Rajapaksa held a special meeting at the Presidential Secretariat today seeking solutions for the fuel crisis. The Prime Minister, Ministers of Finance, Power and Energy and other state officials were present.
The President has issued the relevant instruction to ensure an uninterrupted supply of fuel by making the payments. The ship has arrived today. We will start unloading that. We made the relevant decision to ensure an uninterrupted supply of fuel for this month. We have released the money because we have it. The President has made straightforward decisions on those matters. The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister were present today.
කලබල වෙලා ගිහිල්ලා ඉවරලා ටැංකි පුරවා ගන්න හදන්න එපා.
We will implement a plan to avoid imposing power cuts after the 5th of this month. Payments were made to some fuel stocks today. We will implement a proper plan to provide the Ceylon Electricity Board with the required fuel.
ඔබතුමා කියන ආකාරයට ඉන්ධන පොලිමක් ඉදිරියේදී ඇති වෙන්නේ නැහැ විදුලි කප්පාදුව සිදු වෙන්නේ නැහැ.
ඔව්.
ඒ කියන්නේ අවශ්‍ය ප්‍රමාණයට ඩොලර් තියෙනවද ඔබතුමාලට ගෙවන්න?
ඩොලර් නැතුව ඉතින් කරන්න පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ නේ. ඉතින් කොහොම හරි ඒක ඩොලර් හොයාගෙන රජයක් ඇට අපි ඒ කටයුත්තට මුහුණ දෙන්න කටයුතු කරනවා.
The Energy Ministry spokesperson Chomin Hettiarachchi said $31 million have been released to pay for a 37,300 metric ton diesel consignment. He added that the diesel consignment would be unloaded tomorrow. The Ceylon Bank Employees Union says banks are being pressurized to release dollars required to pay for the imported stocks.
There is no point if the President instructs to release dollars required to import fuel. Banks need dollars. However, for banks to find dollars, the central bank, the finance ministry and the government need to implement a collective plan. But that is not happening. Sometimes we wonder whether the ministers, the central bank governor and the president belong to different parties. The instructions of the central bank governor and the president are contradictory. The central bank governor and the energy minister express contradictory views. Isn't everyone making a decision after discussing this in cabinet? Don't they have an idea about the reason for the foreign exchange crisis and the impact that it can have on banks? When the pressure felt due to the foreign currency shortage is exerted on banks, how can banks face it? Decisions on this shouldn't be made by exerting political influence. This problem shouldn't be resolved by threatening banks to release the funds to pay for the fuel consignments. We need to face this situation successfully after formulating a plan following discussions.
The Sri Lanka Chamber of Pharmaceutical Industry warned today if the dollar crisis in the country worsens, the import of medicine could face a serious crisis.
We import medicine after opening letters of credit through banks. Banks have not opened letters of credit for pharmaceutical companies for over a month and a half, claiming a lack of dollars. We find it difficult to obtain medicine from our suppliers without letters of credit. No supplier is able to provide paracetamol to the country at the current price. This issue applies to many other types of medicine. A price hike for medicine was announced last when the dollar was 194 rupees. Based on such reasons, we feel that there may be a shortage of many types of medicine over the next few months.
මෙවැනි කාරණා කීපයක් මත අපිට හිතෙනවා ඊළඟ මාස කීපය ඇතුළත හුඟක් බෙහෙත් වර්ග නැති වෙන්නට පුළුවනි. තව සති දෙකකට තුනක්.
We have stocks of drugs to meet demand for another 2 to 6 weeks. If we don't handle this situation accurately, we will face an unprecedented crisis. Life-saving drugs too will be scarce in the country. We require $25 to $30 million this month.
This is the Russian military convoy, which is said to stretch to about 40 miles according to foreign media. Now, these are vehicles that are on its way for a war. And this is the situation in Sri Lanka, where vehicles are lined up in huge queues just to purchase fuel. A few years ago, the Public Utilities Commission, or the PUCSL, estimated or predicted that there could be an energy crisis in the years 2022 and 2023. The PUCSL also wrote a note to the cabinet stating that immediate actions should be taken to ensure the uninterrupted power supply across the country. They also stated that water levels in reservoirs have gone down by 43.3%. Meanwhile, they also stated the fuel availability for thermal generation across the power plants, that is Kalanitissa Combined Cycle Power Plant, the West Coast and the Sapugaskanda power plants. However, the PUCSL also noted that these were the requirements for the generation or for the operation of the power plants, that is 145,000 metric tons of furnace oil, 110,000 of diesel and 42,000 megawatts of naphtha. Those were the requirements that the PUCSL stated that will be needed to continue the power supply across the country. However, they also warned that if these requirements are not fulfilled, that the country will have to keep on going for power outages, which they have also stated that seeking for approval or rather granting approval to the Ceylon Electricity Board for 2 to 3 hour power cuts on the 21st and 22nd of February 2022. Now, if these requirements are not fulfilled, they had also warned that the country will have to face a blackout. The general public of Sri Lanka is sandwiched between the fuel crisis and the power crisis. Now, if you take a look at this, the power crisis is a byproduct or a result of the fuel crisis. Now, people may wonder, or even the experts point out, that there are a few reasons for this power crisis, and the main reasons that are pointed out are the high cost of obtaining this energy, or rather not building new power plants. But for an instance, if permission was given to release the 4,000 megawatts for solar power generation, things could have been better. But now, where is the fuel for these power plants to function? Now, a few weeks back, the IOC, the Indian Oil Corporation, increased the prices of their fuel in Sri Lanka. But as you know, as of now, we see at various filling stations across the country, especially the Sipetco filling stations, there is a major shortage of petrol and especially diesel. At this rate, if a Sipetco runs out of stocks of fuel, IOC will have the ability to increase the prices of fuel at whatever the price they want. So even if they increase the prices of fuel from 100 rupees overnight, we, the general public, will not have anything to say about it. We will not have anything to do about it. But is this an attempt of the Indian Oil Corporation or the IOC trying to take the monopoly of the Sri Lankan fuel market, or is it them trying to be a dominant part of the Sri Lankan fuel market? Now, there are a few power plants in Sri Lanka which still have the ability to generate power for the power supply of the country, but those power plants do not have fuel. Why don't we have fuel? What is the reason for this fuel crisis? Minister of Energy Uday Gammapilla stated that Sri Lanka cannot get fuel on credit anymore. So what happened to the dollars of the country? State ministers and even members of the opposition are alleging that you could walk into a supermarket, there can be apples, there can be imported grapes and all sorts of things. But why don't we have dollars then to bring down this fuel? What is the real reason? What is the reason for this fuel crisis? I think that's a problem that you and I and the general public of Sri Lanka all have been thinking about.
Energy Minister Uday Gammapilla says a gazette is to be published tonight to restrict the importation of 600 goods to the country. There is a problem with prioritizing things. If we have limited foreign exchange, we must first allocate them for medicines, fuel and raw materials required by industries. Today we are facing the repercussions of not discouraging imports of all products. Today the Treasury Secretary said a gazette will be issued tonight on restricting imports of 600 goods. We are late now, but we must be happy that they have made this decision at least now.
The Ceylon Chamber of Commerce says urgently addressing the current issue is the fastest way in which the power and energy issues can be tackled in the short term. In a statement, the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce urged the government to commence a progress of engagement with the International Monetary Fund without any further delay to obtain their technical advice in managing the debt servicing as well as boosting foreign reserves. It is the Chamber's belief that a systematic and methodical approach to restructure debt with the support of the IMF will help the government to successfully manage its external debt obligations. The Chamber is concerned that the recovery seen recently in the tourism and export sectors can be seriously hampered and economic growth slowed down unless urgent action is taken to eliminate the disruptions to the supply of electricity and fuel.
The lack of proper road networks in rural Sri Lanka has compounded the woes of citizens already bearing the brunt of a myriad of crises in the country, including acute shortages of fuel and fertilizer. Nearly 1,000 families in the Kandegama village in Aralagangwila, Polonnarua have no one to depend on to restore their road from its decrepit state. 6 or 7 months ago, the RDA commenced work on the road and around 1 kilometer has been constructed, but nothing has taken place since. Vehicles are parked on the roadside. While the lack of a proper road plagues the villagers, they also have to navigate a dearth in fertilizer and constant encroachments from wild elephants that roam in the Madruoya reserve. Even still, they do not have a proper road to transport their harvest.
මේ වීයට 10ක් කරලක නැහැ කිව්වට මැෂින් කාර්යයට ඒක අදාළ නැහැ. මැෂින් කාර්යය බලන්නේ බිම් ප්‍රමාණය. රුපියල් 30000ක් ගන්නවා මේ කපල ඉවර කරන්න. මේ හෙටානිත් දාස්වලු නෙලනේවා. මේ වගේ අස්කන්න අරන් මිනිසුන්ට ජීවත් වෙන්න පුළුවන් බලධාරි මේ ගැනවා කියන්න ඕන.
Moving on, Samagijana Balawege MP Harin Fernando made an appeal to the international community during a special speech at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva today. The opposition lawmaker requested the Prevention of Terrorism Act to be repealed and replaced.
Today in Sri Lanka, the terrorists have become not those who plan or perpetrate the murder of 300 of our own people. The terrorists are not those who have taken innocent life while they pray in churches or eat their breakfast. The terrorists are those that demand accountability. Just a few weeks ago, Sri Lankan government proposed amendments to a PTA. These new proposals sadly leave us most abused provisions of the PTA very much intact. This amendment is an attempt to whitewash Sri Lankan government of its failure to abide by its duties to its own people. Today, as I speak to you here in Geneva, my fellow countrymen are without electricity nearly for 8 hours. They are queuing up for hours to obtain fuel for their vehicles. They can't afford to even square 2 meals a day. It would be the end of our nation as we know it. It would be the end of our times. So, here I am to speak to you, to seek your help. Sri Lanka journey of impunity needs to stop. Its journey of silencing and imprisoning honest people like my friend Ranjan Ramanayaka, who's been imprisoned for 4 years for demanding justice and calling out corruption, needs to stop.
Meanwhile, the Archbishop of Colombo, His Eminence Malcolm Cardinal Ranjith, met with Michelle Bachelet, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Now, the meeting took place on the sidelines of the 49th session of the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva. Let's now toss over to a short commercial break. Do stay with News First. We'll be right back.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
Register today for a Zoom workshop on new technology in Sinhala.
Are we achieving the full potential of our creativity on the 3rd of March at 3 p.m.
Register via 0777 60020.
Organized by Slit Institute.
TechBus.
Main sponsor.
Slit Knowledge University. Challenging convention and redefining education.
Welcome back to the news. 17 unions from the health sector launched a strike today. Now, they say they will continue the strike tomorrow as well, citing several demands, including the need to resolve their salary issues.
17 trade unions from the health sector are currently involved in the trade union action that began at 8 this morning. They refrain from services including issuing medicines, conducting lab tests and treating patients at wards. Public health inspectors and family physicians were among those who withdrew from their duties today.
ඇයි මුණ්ඩ මෙවා පේන්නේ නැද්ද? මේ පොලිමේ මිනිස්සු ඉඳගෙන දැන් දින දීලා ඒක ආපහු දිනයක් දීපම් මේකට ඒකත් නැහැ. ඇයි මේ වගේ තිරිසන් වැඩ කරන්නේ මේ මිනිස්සු?
අනේ මොන බෙහෙත්ද මහත්තයා? දැන් මේ පස්වෙනි සැරේට දුන්නේ මගේ හැට කාච්චි දාන්න කියලා ඉවරලා අසරණ ලෙඩුන්ගෙන් ඉතින් මේ ප්‍රශ්න හැමදේම මෙව්ව වෙන්නේ. අද බෙහෙත් නැහැ කිව්වා. දෙන්නේ පිටින් ගන්න ලියලා දුන්නා. අපි ජීවත් වෙන පිළි වැඩ කරලා බොහොම අමාරු මේ සල්ලි හොයගත්තේ. මේට ඉස්සරින් ඇද්දිත් මේ ස්ටේට් ඊට පස්සෙත් ආපහු ගියා. ඊට පස්සේ අදත් ආවා. අදත් මේ කකුලේ අමාරු වෙන්න බෑ මට. මොකද කරන්නේ අපි ඇත්තම අපි අසරණයි.
The strike is not underway at children's hospitals, cancer hospitals, maternity hospitals, the blood bank and the National Institute of Infectious Diseases.
The bill on the surcharge tax that will be imposed on companies and people who earn a taxable income of more than 2 billion rupees has been tabled in Parliament. According to the bill, entities such as the Employees Provident Fund will also be liable to the one-time 25% surcharge tax. 10 parties, including the Samagi Jana Balawegaya, had filed petitions with the Supreme Court to challenge the proposed legislation. Appearing for the Attorney General, Deputy Solicitor General Viveka Sirivardhana told court that the bill would be amended to exempt 13 funds, including the EPF and the ETF, from the surcharge tax. The Finance Secretary had informed about this in writing to the Attorney General. The Deputy Solicitor General produced a document of the Finance Ministry in court and said that the amendments will be made during the committee stages. The Samagi Jana Balawegaya was the only political party that went to court to challenge the bill.
Samagi Jana Balawegaya.
The Samagi Jana Balawegaya is the only party that went to court to protect the hard-earned money of our innocent employees. I am proud about our effort that paved the way to this victory today. We were able to defeat the attempts of the government to loot the money of the labour force. They tried to use these funds to allow projects that earned them commissions. The Samagi Jana Balawegaya was able to defeat these ventures successfully today. We are proud about it.
දරපු උත්සාහය Samagi Jana Balawegaya පරාජය කරයි කියන එක මම මේ අවස්ථාවේ බොහොම ආඩම්බරෙන් ප්‍රකාශ කරනවා.
These views were expressed by the opposition leader at a public meeting held in Tisamharama.
The 36th International Chartered Accountants Students Conference, organized by the CA Student Society, took place in Colombo yesterday.
The event was held with the active participation of 250 physical attendees, including delegates from India, Nepal, Pakistan and Bangladesh, while having more than 500 virtual participants joining live from across the world, including SAFA delegates. The event was held under the theme Embrace the Transformation, Catch the Wave. Executive Group Director of the Capital Maharaja Group, Siobhan Daniel, was the keynote speaker at the event. Several other personalities representing a plethora of sectors also addressed the conference.
Let's now take a look at the latest developments coming in from Russia and Ukraine.
Russia's military claims it has taken control of the strategically important city of Kherson in southern Ukraine, as the Ukrainian armed forces said Russian troops have landed in Ukraine's second biggest city of Kharkiv and triggered immediate clashes. Russian paratroopers landed in Ukraine's second biggest city amid heavy fighting. Ukrainian officials say a hospital has been attacked and the barracks of a flight school is on fire after an air raid. According to the mayor, at least 21 people have been killed in Russian airstrikes on the northern city since yesterday.
The Russian military has claimed that they have captured Kherson, that they call a strategically important area in Ukraine. But Ukrainian officials have denied that Russia has captured Kherson. As you can see, on the left hand side is Russia and on this side is the Western allies. Now what you see in red is where Russia has launched attacks against Ukraine. These are the areas that Russian troops have entered and have attacked Ukraine. A large number of Ukrainians are now fleeing the country owing to the attacks launched by Russia. Now, Russian Defense Ministry has urged residents of Kiev to leave the country and the area, as they will strike attacks on unspecified locations where security and communication services are based.
According to the United Nations, more than 600,000 civilians have fled Ukraine. The European Union estimates that up to 4 million people may try to leave the country because of the Russian invasion. In a statement, the European Union said, quote, "Europe stands by those in need of protection and will provide protection to those seeking shelter and will help those looking for a safe way home," end quote. Under this proposal, those fleeing the war will be granted temporary protection in the European Union, meaning that they will be given a residence permit and they will have access to education and to the labor market. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden branded Vladimir Putin a dictator in his annual State of the Union address and announced a ban on Russian aircrafts from using US airspace.
To all Americans, I'll be honest with you, as I always promised I would be. A Russian dictator invading a foreign country has cost around the world, and I'm taking robust action to make sure the pain of our sanctions is targeted at the Russian economy, and that we use every tool at our disposal to protect American businesses and consumers.
Ukrainian Ambassador Oksana Makarova, the ambassador of Ukraine to the United States, was given a standing ovation at the United States Capitol yesterday night during Joe Biden's first State of the Union address to Congress.
With the First Lady. Let each of us, if you're able to stand and send an unmistakable signal to the world of Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you.
Boris Johnson was faced with the fury of a Ukrainian journalist calling for a no-fly zone over the country, telling the Prime Minister World War III has already begun. The Prime Minister was giving a press conference in Warsaw, Poland, when he was confronted by a Ukrainian reporter who called for military intervention from the West.
My family, most of my team members are still in Ukraine, in Kiev. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister, but Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't know where to run. This is what is happening, Prime Minister.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has, in the meantime, insisted that even if the West is currently not in the position to grant Kiev NATO membership, it must still make sure the country is completely safe. Zelensky said, quote, "Our partners, if they are not ready to take Ukraine into NATO, because Russia does not want Ukraine to be in NATO, should work out common security guarantees for Ukraine," end quote. The high-level segment of the 49th regular session of the Human Rights Council continued today as well. Speaking at the session, Poland's Minister of Foreign Affairs expressed the following views.
We also need to ask ourselves, should Russia continue to be a member of the Human Rights Council? I want to express my solidarity with Ukraine and make it clear that Poland has taken action in cooperation with our allies to stop this brutal, unprovoked and unjustified act of war. The support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity remains a cornerstone of Polish foreign policy.
Russia's central bank said stock market trading on the Moscow exchange will be suspended for a third day in a row today. It comes after the ruble slumped to a record low and Russian companies listed overseas saw their share prices slide.
Ukraine has now formed Western allies to react to whatever the military operation that the Russian president has launched. Ukraine has gotten its membership at the European Union, and it has also formed friends on the western side of the world where they have pledged to give enough financial assistance and also weaponry to fight against Russia. While Ukraine is trying to make friends and get all the support that they can, Russian president on the other hand is now in some sort of a fix. If the Russian president is to continue with the military operation or the invasion that he has launched, how will that have an impact on the Russian economy? Russian economy is also collapsing. The foreign currency, the currency of Russia, ruble, is depreciating, and the whole crisis have had an impact on the Russian banks as well. The overseas assets of Russia have also been frozen. If the Russian president is to take a step back and stop the military operation, he could be humiliated by the rest of the world. But if he is to move forward, for how long can he launch this military operation is going to be a big question, which only time will tell.
A group of Ukraine nationals who are stranded in Sri Lanka staged a protest outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs against the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Ukrainian nationals had placards and posters outside the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. A moment of silence was also observed for the Ukrainians that are devastated by the war. The protesters also lit candles on behalf of the Ukrainians who lost their lives in the war.
So we asked all the countries, we asked Sri Lanka for support of Ukraine, since we do need that in order to save our countries and lives. Our families are back there sheltering in the bomb shelters, and we do want to help, to have any kind of help from any country of the world. We have our visas extended, and what also we have is an enormous support from each Sri Lanka's person, since every person on the street can just stop and ask, how do we feel, do we need help, and we are indeed very grateful for all of the people of yours.
Meanwhile, 32 Sri Lankans who were in Ukraine have been moved out of the country via 4 separate borders. Now, this was confirmed to Newsfirst by the Sri Lankan ambassador accredited to Ukraine. Earlier, the Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry said that it continues to closely monitor developments in Ukraine.
A delegation of former senior United States defense and security officials appointed by President Joe Biden arrived in Taipei in the midst of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The visit, led by one-time chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Mike Mullen, comes at a time when Taiwan has stepped up its alert level, wary of China taking advantage of a distracted world to move against it. Taiwan Premier Su Seng-chang said the trip showed the importance both of the Taiwan-US relationship and Taiwan's position, as well as the staunch US support for the island. China, which denounced the visit, claims the democratically governed island as its own and has pledged to bring it under Chinese control by force if necessary.
Taking a look back at your local news, a forum organized by 11 parties aligned with the government was held in Sri Javardhanapura Court today.
11 constituent parties of the government convened in Sri Javardhanapura Court today. Former President and Chairman of the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Maithripala Sirisena, was also present at the occasion. 11 parties aligned with the government, including Sri Lanka Freedom Party, Jatika Nidahas Peramuna, Democratic Left Front, Lanka Sabha Samaj Party, Sri Lanka Communist Party, National Congress, Pivituru Helurumaya, Sri Lanka Mahajana Party, Vijayadharani National Council, Eksat Mahajana Party and Yuthukama National Organisation joined the event. A national manifesto under the theme Mulu Ratama Harimagata, or Steering the Country in the Right Direction, was published at the meeting.
සහ උපපරිවෙනාධිපති පූජ්‍ය වැලමිටියාවේ ඥාන රත්න අපේ නායක ස්වාමීන් වහන්සේට
Multiple layers of tarmac are laid on roads, but vehicles run out of fuel to travel on them. Leaders remain ignorant of the severity of the situation. Oil tankers are stationed, but it takes 3 days for LCs to open. The government eventually has to pay demurrage costs and then unload the fuel. We do not need a government that merely stares at a vessel at sea. It needs to analyze the crisis at depth. No one can shun expert support, claiming he can use all 7 of his brains to resolve a crisis. No one with a proud attitude can steer the country out of this situation. The general public are in tears. They are enraged. We should ignore all differences and join a multi-party conference. The government must formulate a method to discuss our woes with leaders of all parties in parliament. The Sri Lanka Nidahas Podujana Alliance was formed prior to the election and I was appointed its chairman. But that alliance has not convened to this day. How are we to express our ideas to the government? How can we provide solutions to these issues? That is why 11 parties within the government have taken the initiative to kick off a debate. There are 30 parliamentarians representing these 11 parties. The government is to blame for this because it forced us to gather separately today. I want to remind the opposition parties to prioritize dialogue at the same table and to set aside their plans to come into power.
And with that, it's a wrap of primetime news here on TV1. For the Newsfirst team, I've been Nyuki Poshia, along with our sign language interpreter Branda Cruz via Zoom. Take care and good night.